Watch right now on the Front News project, Nuclear War on the Doorstep. The US is moving nuclear submarines to Russia's borders. Fierce battles near Pokrovsk. The Ukrainian armed forces are putting up a tough fight. Exclusive footage from the front lines. Drones and missiles targeting the energy sector. Putin is preparing massive bombings of Ukrainian cities. Fiery, intense, and blazing footage from the front lines. Watch right now. It's the fourth year of the full-scale war that Putin's Russia started on Ukrainian soil. The armed forces of Ukraine continue to heroically defend not only their homeland, but the entire civilized world from the aggression of Kremlin war criminals. Greetings, this is Front News. I'm Vladimir Timoshenko and I'm with you. In the next 30 minutes, you'll get the truth about the war, uncovered by our journalists from the hottest combat zones. So, are you ready? Then let's get started. And we're starting right away with exclusive material. Summer is in full swing, but the Russians are already thinking and planning how exactly they'll torment Ukrainians this winter. The enemy is preparing for massive shelling of Ukrainian energy infrastructure during the winter period. Our military is talking about this. What should Ukrainians, both ordinary citizens and those making key decisions for the country, prepare for, and how should they respond to this threat? More on this coming up. A new yet well-forgotten old method of terror from the occupiers. Having achieved no significant gains on the front, the Kremlin resorts to its favorite tactic, intimidating the peaceful Ukrainian population. Specifically, the enemy is preparing for a massive strike on our critical infrastructure.
I believe they will target the energy sector. Don't forget, winter is starting now, and as the cold returns and the heating season begins, they will once again target the energy sector and water utilities. I don't want to scare anyone, but the enemy really does act like a terrorist. And they understand that, for example, to effectively depopulate a city like Kharkiv, they need to knock out all of its energy infrastructure.
According to the commander of the reconnaissance unit, the Russian army simply has no other way to break the Ukrainian spirit. Moreover, this method of terror costs the Kremlin next to nothing. The Iranian Shahed drones, mass-produced in Russia along with their upgraded copies, cost far less compared to the air defense systems that Ukrainian defenders need to shoot them down.
Because it is remarkably cheap, highly effective, and already well within Russia's current technological capabilities, this approach is quite appealing.
Not with quality or precision, but purely with quantity. That's the new motto of the occupying army. According to both analysts and the military themselves, on the eve of the heating season, the main task for the Russian army is and remains to sow panic among the civilian population. And what affects civilians more than disruptions to electricity, water, and heating? That's why the Kremlin is targeting Ukraine's critical infrastructure.
If this hits a city like Kremenchuk or Cherkasy, even if 150 come in, or even 50 hit Cherkasy, that's already significant. It destroys the infrastructure. You don't have to launch 1,000 Shaheds at Kiev every single day. But you can send, say, 50 here, 150 there, 200 somewhere else, and in total you create a huge effect because you're disrupting connectivity, energy, infrastructure, and so on.
However, our defenders are not going to just sit idly by and wait for the strikes. The armed forces of Ukraine are already developing a plan to counter Russian mass air raids.
We are preparing for the heating season. Of course, strengthening air defense, anti-Shahid solutions, and our own weapons production are all elements of our preparations for winter. Critical infrastructure, its condition, and the necessary decisions regarding it are also issues being addressed at the highest level.
Fight fire with fire. In response to the Russian threat, Ukraine is preparing its own strikes on Russian territory. But unlike the Kremlin's Shaheds, the Ukrainian armed forces' drones target Russian defense industry plants, the oil sector, and military airfields.
We need to strike at the critical facilities that are absolutely essential for the ongoing war effort. This includes vital components such as ball bearings, crucial oil refineries, and so on. So, if Ukraine responds effectively by targeting such strategic facilities, just like they are currently hitting our own, then it certainly has a significant chance to gain the necessary resilience that it currently...
Only massive strikes on Russian rear areas can deter Putin and his generals from terrorizing Ukraine's critical infrastructure, military experts say. However, no matter how many oil refineries and military factories the Ukrainian armed forces bomb, the enemy will still try to break through our air defenses. So, at the same time, Ukraine is also working on strengthening the protection of its critical infrastructure. Meanwhile, with the heating season approaching, experts advise ordinary citizens to stock up on warm clothing, water, and power banks just in case of forced rolling blackouts. Now, let's analyze the operational situation on the Lyman front. The bloody rampage of the enemy army continues here as well. On the Lyman front today, Russian forces launched 25 assaults on the positions of Ukrainian defenders near Karpivka, Olhivka, Ridkodub, Torske, Hrihorivka, and in the direction of Seredny, Chernishkina, and Shandrihalov. 6 combat engagements are still ongoing. It is a day of mourning in Kamyanske, in the Dnipropetrovsk region. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the Russians launched a missile strike on the city, targeting the city hospital grounds. 3 people were killed in this attack, including a pregnant woman. Her name was Diana. She was only 23 years old and she was expecting a son. You can find all the details of this tragedy in the following report by TSN correspondent Olha Pavlovska.
On the steps of the maternity hospital, where new life was welcomed every day, there is blood. As a result of the night attack on the city, 23-year-old Diana was killed. She was in the hospital, waiting for her son to be born. Another pregnant woman was injured. Doctors are fighting for the woman's life. Ballistic strikes hit the city during the night. The occupiers targeted the center of the city of Kamyanske with missiles. The explosions occurred almost immediately after the air raid alert. The medical facilities were completely destroyed. A boy was born here just a few hours before the strike. 9 newborns and their mothers were able to be taken to shelter in time.
Thank God none of them were hurt, neither the mothers nor the babies. Somehow everything was gathered together by some miracle. We did everything quickly. They didn't even notice how we ended up in a safe place. Of course, we were scared.
Some of the medical staff who were saving patients were injured. Their lives are not in danger. With bandaged wounds, they are clearing out the destroyed wards and delivery rooms.
I have a minor injury, but everything will be fine. The doors fell on me as I was leaving. Glass on my hands and legs, but it's nothing serious.
Another person who died was an elderly man in the neighboring therapeutic building. He was in the palliative care unit. The patient's relatives say that many patients simply didn't have time to hide.
He turned away because he was paralyzed. His right side wasn't moving. And so everything came crashing down on him from the ceiling, from the windows. He was terrified after his stroke.
In total, there were approximately 100 individuals present within the medical facilities that particular night. 5 people were injured. Here, offices and wards have been destroyed. Medical staff are clearing away the damaged property.
The oncology dispensary department was hit very hard. All the offices were damaged. All the windows were blown out, the ceilings collapsed, and the doors were torn off.
In total, windows were blown out in about 50 houses. More than 300 windows were shattered to pieces.
This is a nightmare. The explosions were so loud, it was unbelievable. Glass was flying everywhere. May it come back to him 1,000 times over.
There is significant destruction in the center of Kamyanske.
In addition, 2 school buildings, 2 kindergartens, and 2 more of our medical facilities, a children's clinic, and a dermatovenerologic dispensary, were also damaged.
Patients from the damaged medical facilities have already been transferred to other departments. These premises are no longer suitable for providing care.
But even that is not enough for the Russian war criminals. They continue to terrorize civilians, including in the Dnipropetrovsk region. These people had packed up their last belongings and were saying goodbye to their native village when suddenly the enemy attacked them. This is the story of a married couple who were leaving the village of Velikomikhaylivka. The occupiers struck their car with a drone. Volodymyr suffered a very severe injury, but the doctors still managed to save his life. His wounded wife is next to him in the intensive care unit. This is the story of a couple who didn't have time to evacuate peacefully. This story will be shown and told by TSN correspondent Olha Pavlovska.
She holds his hand and insists that he must recover. Wounded Svetlana runs from the trauma unit to her husband in intensive care to support him.
I can't let him be here alone. When I'm next to him, he feels more comfortable.
This is all that's left of their car. The family was just leaving the village of Veliko Bakarivka, escaping constant shelling, when an enemy drone struck their car directly.
At first I was scared, I was really scared, and I said, let's jump out while the car is moving so it doesn't explode. He said, I can't, my leg hurts. I said, then hit the brakes.
Svetlana got away with minor shrapnel wounds, but Volodymyr was brought to the hospital with massive injuries and severe blood loss.
Large pieces of muscle and skin unfortunately were torn off after the explosion. The most important thing now is to prevent kidney failure and to save his leg.
After 2 surgeries and a blood transfusion, the man is finally conscious. He admitted to his wife that he regrets going back home for their things that day.
He said, why did we go there? We won't go back there again. There's no one left in the village at all. In just 2 weeks, the village was simply destroyed.
They had lived their whole lives in a village in the Dnipropetrovsk region, almost on the border with Donetsk. Volodymyr worked as a turner, and Svetlana took care of elderly people. The woman hopes that with her support, her husband will cope and be able to walk again. And then, in their new place, they will start building their lives all over again.
And now let's move to the long-suffering Pokrovsk direction of the front. The enemy is becoming more ferocious here as well. In the Pokrovsk direction, over the course of the day, the aggressors carried out 38 assault and offensive actions. Russian occupiers' activity was observed in the areas of the settlements of Popov Yar, Novoekonomicheskaya, Mairolyubovka, Zverevo, Kotlino, Udakhnoye, Orekhovoye, and in the direction of the settlements of Nova Ukrayinka, Novopodgonoye, Rodinskoye, and Krasny Liman. Fighting is still ongoing in 2 locations. The Russian army has not captured Chasiv Yar, as Russian propaganda claims. Yes, the situation is difficult, especially with the logistics of the armed forces of Ukraine, but the city remains under the control of Ukrainian defenders. Meanwhile, Russian assault troops have already reached the center of Pokrovsk, but the occupiers have not managed to gain a foothold there. What is happening right now on the front and around it? Find out in our report.
Armata.
Fire!
Russian flags in the center of Chasiv Yar, the encirclement of Pokrovsk, and the recapture of territory by Ukrainian forces in the Lyman direction. Everything happening on the front today, right now. This video has caused quite a stir. The Russian tricolor in Chasiv Yar. Russian propaganda is already claiming that the city has been taken and is under Russian control. However, the Z-Patriots have once again gone too far. Our fighters report that all key heights of Chasiv Yar are under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces, which is about 40% of the territory. At the same time, there are areas that the sabotage and reconnaissance groups can't even reach.
Well, they raised the flag, took a photo, filmed a video, and reported it up the chain. After that, the situation escalated, the information started spreading. As of today, fighting is ongoing for Chasiv Yar. The Ukrainian army maintains rather advantageous positions in the city, but at the same time, of course, part of the city is either in the gray zone or under enemy control. At present, there is no basis to claim that Chasiv Yar is occupied by the Russian army.
But the enemy will not abandon attempts to storm the city in the near future. The commanding heights, which Ukrainian soldiers have been holding for over a year with superhuman effort, make it possible to retain the most crucial point of Ukrainian logistics in Donbas, Kostiantynivka.
The city itself is situated on a controlling elevation. If the enemy captures it and manages to secure these heights, they will gain a tactical advantage. That is why these battles for Chasiv Yar, for the enemy, the battles for Chasiv Yar are not very important. If they fully capture Chasiv Yar, they gain the ability to control both the surroundings of Kostiantynivka and the area beyond Kostiantynivka with their fire. In other words, they gain a tactical advantage in the battles for Kostiantynivka.
The war for logistics is now ongoing, especially on the main axis of the occupiers' offensive, Pokrovsk. By cutting off the direct route from Kostiantynivka here, the enemy is trying to deprive our units of the ability to rotate, as well as to deliver ammunition and supplies.
The situation is especially difficult between the settlements of Mirnohrad and Kostiantynivka, where the enemy has broken through and crossed the road connecting Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka and is trying to advance both towards Pokrovsk, bypassing the city from the northeast, and towards Kostiantynivka. In other words, their goal is to reach the Druzhkivka-Dobropilya line, establish a foothold there, and create a sort of overhang and precondition, so to speak, that would allow them to further develop their offensive or attempt to encircle the aforementioned settlements.
However, our command says there is no talk of encirclement. On the contrary, the Ukrainian armed forces have established new supply routes into the city and, thanks to reconnaissance, have a complete understanding of the enemy's positions and what they are currently capable of.
The situation is tense, but our Cossacks are holding their ground. The situation is tense, but our Cossacks are coping, regularly carrying out rotations. In other words, they are holding defensive battles. If the units were not rotated regularly, it would be very difficult. To maintain high combat effectiveness, rotations take place regularly. This includes electronic warfare as well as air defense systems. It can also involve our rifle units, who are directly engaged in intercepting FPV drones. It's also important to understand which logistical routes are currently more or less safe and where the enemy is located right now. In other words, it's a set of actions that allows us to carry out logistics and defend ourselves effectively.
At the same time, for the second week in a row, information has been appearing in the media about Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups entering Pokrovsk. On Russian TV, these raids by groups of 3 to 5 people have been loudly described as taking control of part of the city. The Ukrainian Armed Forces Command reported that such groups did exist, but now all the sabotage and reconnaissance groups in Pokrovsk have been eliminated and currently pose no strategic threat.
Their primary and most crucial task is reconnaissance. They are essentially expendables, individuals who are fully expected to perish today or perhaps even tomorrow. However, their true and underlying mission, in actual fact, is to deliberately use their very own lives to thoroughly expose and reveal our entire defense system within the city's boundaries. Wherever a group passes through without resistance, it means there's an open field. Where they encounter resistance, where they are destroyed, that's where the strongholds of resistance are. And all of this is monitored by electronic intelligence and their drones. In other words, the Russian forces are meticulously mapping out a comprehensive plan for the city's defense. And this critically indicates that they are indeed actively preparing for a direct and significant assault on Pokrovsk.
The General Staff notes that despite the enormous pressure in the Donetsk region, over the past day, the occupiers have also continued offensive actions along the entire front line, in Sumy, Kharkiv, and in the south. The enemy's efforts were unsuccessful, while the Ukrainian armed forces, on the contrary, advanced in the Lyman direction. As a result, the settlement of Malievka has returned to Ukrainian control.
And now an analysis of the operational situation on the Novopavlivka section of the front. The so-called Russian world continues to destroy, kill, and maim here as well. In the Novopavlivka direction, the occupiers launched 14 attacks on Ukrainian positions, attempting to advance in the areas of the settlements of Zaporizhia, Novokhatske, Voskresenka, Zelenoye Pol, Mirne, Malievka, Timirovka, Novopole, and toward the settlement of Levadne. One combat engagement is still ongoing. Meanwhile, Moscow and Washington are already openly talking about nuclear war. American nuclear submarines have approached the borders of the Russian Federation. Medvedev has come to an agreement. But, to be honest, all of this is, to put it mildly, not cheerful at all. More about the nuclear threat looming over the world in our exclusive report.
The threat of nuclear war has knocked on Russia's door at the invitation of Dmitry Medvedev. Donald Trump sent a clear signal to Putin. With the current US president, nuclear blackmail won't work.
In response to the extremely provocative statements made by former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, who is now the deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, I have ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be deployed in the appropriate areas in case these foolish and provocative statements turn out to be more than just words.
As proof of the seriousness of his intentions, in an interview with American media, the head of the White House first declared Washington's readiness for nuclear war with Moscow.
The former president of the Russian Federation started talking about nuclear weapons. And when it comes to nuclear weapons, we must be prepared, and we are fully prepared.
He confirmed US nuclear submarines are redeployed.